And we are back. And with me again is Echo Frayne.
I'll take it.
Sometimes, when you're talking about shit that's not funny, got to be a little bit funny. So, as we left off the last time, we were at the Erez Crossing, which is the checkpoint, the northern checkpoint to the Gaza Strip on the Israeli side. And quick recap, we had one of our teams from the embassy in Tel Aviv was hit by an anti-tank mine that was laid in the roadbed by Hamas. Excuse me. And this was all subsequent to an attack on another agency's team in July. So this was October. In July, our sister agency takes an attempt on them, did not result in loss of life. So just to reiterate this, because it's kind of a sticking point for me, definitely, we worked with some really, really awesome State Department Diplomatic Security Service agents, some fantastic ones. Well, this particular mission was supposed to be my team. The night before, we got tasked with what was deemed to be a higher priority, higher risk mission. So we switched the pieces, right? Switched out the board a little bit. So now, last minute, there's a team supposed to be an elite protective services team from wherever they come from. And State Department, MSD, Mobile Security Detachment, Mobile Security douchebags, kind of what they turned out to be. But and I say that with all sincerity because I've worked with some of the best that agency had to offer. These guys were not it. To start it off, John Branchizio, who was the team leader of Bravo team at that time, he was just such a good guy. So he's excited. He's going to take this mission, and I guess that's the irony of it. Is like we operated as one team would take hot seat, and it would take any mission that came up that week. The other team would be standby. But it just speaks to the character where nobody really liked to sit out. So, Tuesday night, the night before the attack, another call comes in. It's supposed to be a higher risk mission. So the hot seat team, which was Alpha team, we take that one. Right. Which means Bravo team takes the one we were supposed to take. So be it. Now, this MSD detachment is up in Jerusalem. They're relatively new in country. So their instructions are they're going to ride along with our teams, get a familiarity to the Gaza Strip. Super. So John is given their number, told to call their team leader. He calls him up, and again, John was outgoing, friendly, funny, good solid dude. He calls him up, and he's like, "Hey, is this so-and-so? Yeah, I'm John Branchizio, team leader from Tel Aviv, yada, yada. I was told to give you a call." And at some point early in the conversation, this guy says to him, "Are you a contractor?" And John said, "Oh, yes, I am." Okay, well, what's that have to do with anything, right? And John says, "Well, yes, I am." At that, this State Department guy says, "Well, have your RSO call me. I don't talk to contractors." And he hangs up on him, right? Excuse me. But, so he hangs up on him. So John calls our State Department guys. He says, "Hey, this is what happened." So they call up the MSD team leader. They straighten him out. And they agree to rendezvous the next day at the Yad Mordecai truck junction, which was like their version of Breezewood, I guess you could say. Yeah. It was like Ashdod, Ashkelon, some of the beach communities along, the prior to entry into Gaza. So that's where they linked up. We weren't going to be moving for a little bit longer. We were still in Tel Aviv. So long story short, John configures the motorcade. Now he still has tactical command, and these guys are only along for familiarization. So, we covered this the last time, but I really want to review it for anybody that missed that one. In a 3-car motorcade, a standard, you're not trying to fool anybody motorcade, embassy Suburbans, you would have a lead vehicle, you would have your high value pack in the middle vehicle, right, and then you would have your follow vehicle. So the lead and the follow are kind of like your maneuver elements. The lead's going to clear the way, follow will move as it has to, and ultimately your only goal is to cover the package, right? So the way we always ran with 2 vehicles was the high value pack is up front with a State Department agent from our embassy in Tel Aviv, an embassy driver, and these guys were intimately familiar with the Gaza Strip, the good guys, embassy staff, and then we, the contractors, we would follow, and the team leader in the follow vehicle would have tactical control of the mission, right? So making the right call, John was like, look, you guys are along for the ride. You don't know the streets. You've never been here before. You're going to be in the 3rd vehicle. We'll be in the middle. Like, we're going to roll as we always do. Package up front, us behind them. You'll be our gun truck, our maneuverability. You're like a trailer, Well, what it did for the trigger man on the device was it gave him a perfect picture of a 3-vehicle motorcade. He made the assumption that the high-value pack was in the middle. And when the first vehicle rode over the X, second vehicle got over, our guys, boom, he command detonates it and, destroys the vehicle. So I think I already recovered, I covered our response time. We got down there as fast as we could. We had we had Alpha Team intact. We took with us a State Department agent who jumped in another vehicle at the embassy and drove down with us. Steve is his name. He had just gotten in country. Quiet, reserved, just like strangely quiet. But he was just a good, and that's coming from somebody who's not strangely quiet, but very solid operator, good guy, but very, very quiet. And, and for the life of me, I don't remember the makeup, who else was in his vehicle on the way down. I don't remember, but we get down to the Erez Crossing, and it's things that you remember, like oddities, that you remember. We get down on site. Vic was our team leader. Okay, former LA County Sheriff. Prior to that, he was a Marine. And when we got word that there was a Palestinian ambulance bringing the sole survivor back to the crossing, we were like, okay, great. So Vic looks at me. He was Alpha 1, and I was Alpha 2. He looks at me, and he's like, Rock, you're taking over. He's like, and a lot of things happening at the same time, right? We had our IDF, Israeli Defense Force liaison officer, a really, really good guy. I'll call him Captain Joe. His name really was Joe, captain at the time. So he comes over, and I told him about this months later. We were at a party in Tel Aviv, and I said, man, I have to ask you something. This is going to sound weird. He said, yeah, what's that? I said, that day, we're planning to, what are we going to do next? What's happening? We don't know where the other 3 bodies are. We know that, the last we heard was 3 dead, 1 living. We know that Oscar is inbound simply because the only thing that happened was there was a Palestinian ambulance that was coming out of one of the refugee camps. And there was and I don't remember which was which. One was waterside, oceanside, and the other one was inland, but virtually right across from one another. The attack occurred almost in between the 2 of them on the road, the single main road that leads into Gaza City. So, by coincidence, this Palestinian ambulance just came up over the hill, sees the wreckage, and he sees one man moving around on the street, right? So they pick him up, they take him to the hospital, they get him cleaned up, stabilized, and then they make contact. Their people make contact with the IDF at the crossing. They're like, hey, we have a survivor, we're bringing him back. No word yet on the other 3. Right. So all this is spinning, right? So Vic says to me, he's like, Rock, you're in charge. He's like, there was a medical helicopter orbiting like 500 feet overhead. It wouldn't land until Oscar got to the landing zone because they wanted to coordinate this fast. Like, they're going to land, cross over, and off they go, to get him to the nearest hospital. It's like, okay, great. And I remember thinking that. I was like, yeah, man, I got you. But first things first, like, where are the other guys? Like, we've got 3 unaccounted for. So super. So in the interim, we get a call from the embassy, right? But as this is happening, Joe is right beside me, and he was like, okay, he's like, we want to brief this, first, there are no more survivors, but the bodies, right? What's next? As I'm talking to him, it's kind of like I hear what he's saying and I'm comprehending it, but it was almost like wah, 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 like in a fog a little bit. But I do remember this clearly. He was in his everyday uniform, which would be like Marine Corps, Army, Navy. We all have a different name for it, but in the Navy we would have called it working khakis. Like at the officer and NCO level, working khakis. So it'd be like khaki trousers, a khaki short sleeve shirt. Okay, he was in that equivalent. Or like green trousers, like the U.S. Army green.
Okay.
Like green trousers, not fatigues, but crisp pleat. What do you call it?
Yeah, like they're ironed out.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Just like pristine, like dress trousers,
Okay.
but like a uniform, right?
Right.
And a open collared light green shirt with his shoulder insignia and his beret. And we saw him in that all the time.
Right.
Like that was his everyday uniform. I kid you not. In less time than it took me to turn and take a phone call, right? I turned back around. Same guy. He's now standing beside me in fatigues, a helmet, body armor, and a rifle. And I'm like...
It's like a cartoon almost, like you turn...
Right? I kid you not.
Yeah.
And then again, that stuck in my head. I was like, what? And I realized, like, I didn't black out. Yeah. And the phone call wasn't that long, right? One of the first calls I got was from the RSO, the regional security officer at the embassy. And he had recently arrived and replaced, they do a rotation. And this guy was legit. Ironically, he was one of the founding members, as I recall the story, he was one of the founding members of their MSD when they realized there was more of a need for a more capable, more tactically sound security detachment for some high-risk posts. He was one of the founding members. And you could tell. You could tell the way he carried himself. You could tell his sense of humor, his bearing. He was a good guy. And I guess what ended up happening was I don't know who he called first, but I think he attempted to call Vic. Vic's not answering because he's on a helicopter, right? So he calls me. And I remember still looking for the bodies. We had every reason to believe they were at the hospital. That was our next, okay, the ambulance came and picked up Oscar. He makes a call. They had to have sent more. They took him to the hospital. In fact, I think we may have gotten word that the other three bodies were taken to the hospital in Gaza City. Now, we had been all over Gaza City for the last year and a half, right? So you bet everything worth knowing where it was, we had already taken GPA coordinate. GPA.
Yeah.
See what I mean? And you know what? This is only coffee with a little cream and honey because I got a sore throat. GPS. Yeah. We had taken GPS hits on everything worth knowing where it was, right? So in my mind, I'm like, well, the mission's clear. We're getting cleared. We're going to roll into the city, take an alternate route, and we're not waiting for any, we're not being escorted by the same assholes that would have led our guys into an ambush, right? Because you have to be a genius to figure that out. The Palestinian Authority, who had already been infiltrated by Hamas, that was 20 years ago. That was 20 years ago when Hamas was still kind of pretending to be like a group for the people and all that. So we're going to go get our guys. That's it. We didn't have to be told. Well, now the embassy's thinking the same thing. And I remember this. It gave me I don't know, I can't say chills. It was what I was thinking, right? And Mark was he's like, Rocky, you get those boys. This will not become another Mogadishu. And I'll tell you, he hit right on that because it was running through my head. I was like, man, I can't imagine because we're already getting feedback. We're already getting word that there's a crowd of 400 to 500 at the attack site. And they're celebrating in the wreckage, throwing bumpers and shit up in the air and hooting and hollering, right? And I'm like, okay, all right, that's how this is going to go. Well, no, they're not going to turn this into Mogadishu. We're not going to have our boys dragged through the fucking streets of Gaza City. And I was like, okay, so now as this is percolating, I turn and here's Joe, and from his everyday office apparel. Now he's in his kit, and I'm like, what? Now, interestingly enough, we put a pin in that. But months later, when I was able to say, hey, I can't get this out of my head, how did that happen? And he starts laughing, and he goes, oh, Rocky, he said, he's like, I realized what we were going to do. And he said, he's like, I didn't have my weapon. I didn't have anything. He's like, and I didn't want to go back to my office. It was too far. He ran across the parking lot, ran into the processing center, looked around, and I wasn't familiar enough with Israeli rank devices at the time.
Right.
It wasn't his uniform. He looked around. He found a soldier that was roughly his size. He goes, "You, come here." They switched clothes, and I guess, or he took the kids' clothes. I mean, boots and all,
Wow.
boots and all. And then I guess the kid had like a sweatsuit or something in his locker, so he went and changed. But what was really kind of wild at that point. So we've got our general orders. Don't let this turn into another Mogadishu. I'm like, yeah, Roger that. So now I come back out, and I've got Steve, Kurt, Nason, myself. Steve was from the embassy. Kurt and Nason were my teammates. And I said, all right, I said, well, who have we got available? Like, who have we got available? Because we're going to, I'm like, punch in get the GPS location. We got to roll in. The hospital's the place to go. How we're going to load them up, what we're going to load them into, we'll figure that out when we get there. But we got to go fast. Next thing you know, I get tapped on the shoulder. It's Joe. And he's like, Rocky, this is General so-and-so. And I'm like, sir? Well, he didn't speak English, and I don't speak Hebrew, right?
Yeah.
So Joe's translating.
Yeah.
And I kid you not, we lay a map out over the hood of a Suburban, and he was like, okay. He's like, we've got a gunship orbiting at, between 500 to 1,000 feet, helicopter gunship. He's like, we've got special forces 300 meters inland. And he was like, when you make your move, what we're going to do, and this is no bullshit. Now, there was and I you know how I feel about first and last names, right? Vaughn was the RSO who was on that mission, right? One of the best, most solid guys I've ever known. So I want to be crystal clear. When I throw dirt, I know exactly who I'm throwing it at. And it's not these guys, right? So Vaughn was one of the Tel Aviv RSOs who would roll with us quite often. Eric, in the center of that picture up there, he was one that we rolled with most of the time. But again, in part of the rotation, his time on the road with us had come to an end. Vaughn had kind of stepped into that role. Well, now Eric was back, still part of the project, but he was really operating it at the next highest level back at the embassy. And this actually becomes kind of funny in a minute. I did not know this for 20 years. He was able to come up. He and Jim were in country last October for the 20th anniversary. Just by coincidence, it was lined up with the 20th anniversary, just a little bit after the 20th anniversary of the attack. And I did not know this until then. But while all this is going on, like, all I can tell you is my piece of it from being where I was on the ground. Well, everybody had their piece. Jim was already in Iraq, okay? Eric was back at the embassy coordinating efforts. So, like, okay, great. So now one thing and another, translating through Joe, the general says, okay, these are the assets we have for you. We've already launched a gunship. It's orbiting between 500 to 1,000 feet. It'll be above you when you move in. Roger that. Now, we have no direct communications with them, right? Nor do we have direct communications with the SF assets, concealed like 300 meters inland. Joe Levy and Vaughn. Now, Vaughn had already been, he was in the lead vehicle when this attack happened.
Right.
So he reloads, right? They get in an IDF armored vehicle with a driver, and they follow us. That's their plan. They're going to follow us at a safe distance so that if we get in the shit, I make a radio call, Vaughn picks it up, Joe hears it because he's right beside him. He relays exactly what I say to Vaughn, whatever we need. We're in, and listen, I'm not stupid, right? And this is not a movie.
Yeah.
There is no such thing as well, that's not entirely true. I was reluctant to call for gunship support because whatever happens, we're going to be right in the middle of it. Right? It's not like an airstrike where you could go, they are 50 meters to my east, you're going to be in the middle of it. Right. So that would have been the but listen, in that moment, such was my mindset at that time. There's no doubt about it. We weren't going out quietly. Right. And if that was the call, that would have been the call. Right. And I think I would have gone out with a smile on my face thinking, all right, fuckers, you're going to pay dearly.
Right.
I think the special forces option would have probably been maybe more practical, but at that point, we're still, our plan right now is they're at the hospital. We've got to go get them. Go.
So just to be clear, so just to put everything into my mind here. So the convoy with John gets hit.
Correct.
Middle vehicle gets hit.
Mm-hmm.
There's no follow-up attack at that time. There's not
no
fighters running out, anything to clean up the
No.
survivors. Okay.
No.
So then we have 3 casualties, 1 injured, and those 3 casualties are taken to the hospital, basically. And maybe under good pretext, but you think maybe what's going to happen, to reference Mogadishu, is that folks are going to parade the bodies around as a sort of as a I don't know, a display of success or something,
exactly.
Whatever you want to say.
Exactly. And I'll tell you, I think what concerned me the most was, and again, you could certainly jump to conclusions, right? But, and if maybe I didn't say this, or if I did, maybe I wasn't clear. They had already, they being the crowd that came out of the refugee camp on the water side, the beach side, they had already converged on the attack site.
Yep.
And as they were literally celebrating through the wreckage, my concern was it was in my head. I'm not counting it out as an option. It's just a matter of time until they find out where the remains are and they make their way there.
Right.
Or even once word travels, what I didn't want to do was I didn't want to have to fight my way into and out of the city.
Right.
But, and this probably in hindsight, or not hindsight, I know how I've carried this for 20 years, but to someone else it might sound stupid, all right? But there's no way. Fuck. They were not getting left behind,
Right.
alive or dead.
Mm-hmm.
So what I kept thinking was, I'm saying yes to everything right now.
Right.
Greenlight us. Let us roll, because the longer we stay here, all that had to happen was someone change their minds.
Right.
All that had to happen, and I've got respect for this. The RSO at the time, Mark, it would have been very difficult for me to not comply if he had said stand down.
Right.
He was that kind of guy. It would have been physically impossible had he said that, because the Israelis would have shut down the checkpoint and not allowed us to cross.
Right.
So that being said, I was like, yes, sir, yes, sir. Like in my mind, I'm like, before somebody changes their mind, let's go. Because once we roll, I'm not coming back.
Right.
You can call me back. And I'll have a radio malfunction, or we all will.
Right. Right.
That you could work around. There's a little bit feasibility, and if not, then you face the music when you're back. But to not, hey, the border's closed, you're not going anywhere. We didn't want that to happen, right? So we're like, okay, we got this. But in the meanwhile, what was really, really messed up. Now bear in mind, I want to tell this part of the story now, because this is what happened chronologically. I didn't find out about this until later.
Right.
So now you got all these moving parts, right? We're coordinating with the embassy. We're coordinating with the IDF. And it wasn't lost on me, even in that moment, that Joe and Vaughn are, and I realized, I'm like, okay, so Vaughn was in the lead vehicle. The gun truck right behind him blew up. He was the one, boom, 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 making the next calls, all right? To get back to safety, and then to jock up and go right away to do it again to support us, there's nothing in the world I can say about this guy that would be enough. There's not. Right. There's not. He's got his own station now, the last I heard, and I wish him all the best. And he is just, that's what guys in that line of work should aspire to emulate. Right. That's what they should want to. That should be the role model. Okay, so matter of fact, he's the one that took me aside later and filled me in on everything that I'll tell you now, because this is chronological. Okay, so primary mission of PSD, personal security detachment. nothing happens to that high value package. That's the mission. That is the mission. Okay. So now remember the order, right? There's Vaughn and the high value pack in the lead vehicle with Paul, the embassy driver, and our guys in the follow, and then the high speed, wonder kids in the third vehicle. The minute, boom, detonation takes, right? So Paul is like anybody else. Paul's like, what the hell, right? So Vaughn, in his own words, as he told me, he looks in his mirror and he just sees black smoke. Can't see anything else. Doesn't see anything else. Now, the next thing you think you would see, unless they took out both vehicles, there's got to be another vehicle coming through that smoke any minute. There's not. So, and again, this is as I heard this from Vaughn. Paul says, "What do we do?" It's not a bad question. I don't challenge that question. I don't say, "What do you mean? What do we do?" Hey, man, he's the driver. You're in charge. What do we do? And Vaughn was like, okay, so you're thinking like this pretty fast. He's like, Gaza City straight ahead. We don't know, as your earlier question, is there a secondary follow-on attack? If you recall, in that story from July, that first thing that showed up when our guys, and they were buzzed. I can't say they were out cold, but they were rocked. Yeah. When they came to, directly across the street in front of them was a Palestinian Authority police vehicle, two jokers getting out with their AKs. Again, were they getting out in an aggressive fashion to come finish the job? Or were they getting out with their weapons because, hey, there was just an attack? Maybe they were good guys and they just went to stage there, for whatever. I don't know. But there wasn't, so now Vaughn's like, are we driving into a bigger ambush? You've got camps on both sides there. And again, I want to be crystal clear on this. We worked in Gaza for 2 years. We met a lot of Palestinians. There are regular working class people there as well. There are. And right now, what's going on globally, what's going on in Israel, I do feel for the civilian population that gets caught up in it 100%. I mean, you have to understand that. But at the same time, we quickly degenerate from pro-Palestinian to pro-Hamas because now they're like the fucking Robin Hoods of Palestine or some bullshit, to anti-Semitism at a level higher than I've ever seen it in my lifetime, to anti-American sentiment. Okay, it's a slippery slope, right? And the irony of it is, under the very banner of freedom that we provide. So I'm a little slow to accept that, right? Yeah. But so Vaughn's like, stop the vehicle, turn us around, go back. At that point, you got a shit sandwich. And as my friend White Boy said, first time I ever heard this expression was from him. And if you recall, he was with us for a while and left like 6 weeks prior, due to think about it. It's not like he was clairvoyant, but everything all the concerns we had led up to that moment. Time and place predictable, roger that. Easily being led, by the Palestinian Authority that had at that time probably been compromised, right? So all the red flags that, we had all seen, but, Chris was the one who was vocal and pointed it out. And I will never, and I don't want to speak ill of the dead, but, as I told you, Roger passed away from natural causes after that sometime. But the smug arrogance, I'll tell you what, you don't like it, there's the door. And it wasn't funny, and I didn't really laugh out loud because I didn't want Chris to leave.
Right.
But that smug son of a bitch, well, if you don't like it, Chris, there's the door. And right then and there, he's like, well, all right then, consider this my 2-week notice. And true to his word, he was gone, But, so he used to say it. He was like, when you get a shit sandwich, you take a big bite. So here we are. And again, Vaughn's like, okay, so tactically, you got a refugee camp to the inland. You got one to the seaside. Gaza City straight ahead. The refugee camps, the threat that they presented was the ease for a hostile element to blend in with the local population, right? Because again, most of the people that were at the attack site, once that celebration got underway, I think they were just kind of like, hate to say it, like pawns on the chessboard. They were just in it.
Right.
And, well, why are you doing that? I don't know, because he's doing it. Woohoo!
And you get a mob mentality.
Exactly.
Builds up. Yeah.
Exactly. So Vaughn says, turn us around, get us out of here. So they turn around and they drive back, and it's still smoke and fire and debris everywhere. Now there's no sign of the MSD guys. None. One vehicle. It looked like, somewhere I have pictures of it, but it was literally mangled. This was a level 4 Suburban, like just twisted and mangled, right? No sign of another Suburban, no sign of the MSD element. So Vaughn gets on the radio. And I don't know what call sign they gave themselves, but, let's say it was like CAT, like counter assault team or something, He's like, CAT, this is lead. Where are you? The team leader comes back on the radio and he says, we're clearing the path to the north. Clearing the path to the north. They were not 2 kilometers inland. 2 kilometers south of the crossing. There is nothing to the north.
Right.
Now, on the other hand, well, what if the attack was coming from there? Highly, highly unlikely, because it's desolate. Like I said, I can still see it in my mind to this day. It's desolate. Not to say it couldn't, but it's highly unlikely. You would have been coming from the Israeli side.
Yeah.
They ran. Yeah. They turned and they ran, and that's exactly what happened. And Vaughn, as this is happening, they're still moving, right? Now, Paul, the driver, as you could imagine, Paul's a good man. He was a driver. He wasn't tactical. He wasn't a special agent. He was a driver. And we had been there for a year and a half, and we really bonded. Like he was a friend of ours, and I think that was very hard for him to comprehend. But to his credit, man, he stayed in the fight and got, just got him out, right? But Vaughn's on the radio, and as they're driving by, he sees the bodies laying in the street among the wreckage, and he sees a couple of them moving. And he was like, Cat, this is lead. He's like, get back here. You've got Americans on the ground. Get back here. No. The reply was no. They're not coming back. I'm like, no, we didn't know any of this. We didn't know any of this at that time. I don't know if I mentioned this the last time or not, but when we rolled in to the checkpoint, before everything that I just told you, before that we rolled on site, before we linked up with Joe, before I briefed with the general, before Vic said, hey, you're in charge, I'm going with Oscar.
Yep. I
look over and I see those guys. We didn't even know who they were at that moment. I was like, who are those guys? And I don't remember who told us. They're like, oh, well, they were in the third vehicle. I'm like, oh, right on. I don't know. Are they hurt? Was their vehicle disabled? And that's one of the things in motorcade operations. If you are too close to the vehicle in front of you, an ordnance, an IED that takes out any vehicle could damage, the vehicle's too close proximity to it. So I don't know what's happened, right? So at that point, we're like, okay, we're getting ready to go back. Who do we have? What vehicles do we have? So we've got 2 Suburbans. Steve came down with us from the embassy. He's like, yeah, I'll go. And the simple reason for taking 2 vehicles, if anything should happen to one,
Yep.
we're not running out. Right? So we're like, okay, now, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but this was somewhat embarrassing. We had just gotten a new Deputy Regional Security Officer, DRSO, and so new that we had yet to meet him. Like our team had not crossed paths with him. He's new to the embassy, not new to the State Department. Good guy, good guy, but we hadn't met him yet. So these Suburbans have 3 seats, 3 rows, 3 rows. I couldn't tell you how far away from the embassy we were. This is backing up a bit. We get in the vehicles to roll. Vic's in the front seat. Kurt's driving. Nason and I are in the back. And we're monitoring our radios, like for updates. And 40-mile drive from Tel Aviv to the Erez Crossing. And we're running fast.
Yep.
But it wasn't tactical. Like we're not like, looking, we're rolling. I don't know what possessed me. It was like I felt something behind me. I turn around, There's a guy sitting behind me. Never said a word, right? And I go, who are you? And he introduces himself. He goes, oh, I'm so-and-so, the DRSO. I'm like, sir, and I'm thinking like, why wouldn't you say like, hey guys, I guess he got in our Suburban in the courtyard at the embassy before we rolled, and just
hanging out.
And to his credit, man, he's going with us, and I appreciated that. It was great. So so all this is happening, right? Get the phone call. Now we need assets. And in my mind, I'm thinking, well, we're gonna go get these guys. Like, let's go. Before we can even move, it was Joe. It was Captain Levy. And I'm trying to remember the time frame, because in my mind, we're pressed. We've got to go. We've got to get to the hospital, get our boys, and get out before anything changes. I take a walk over, and I said, hey, guys, and they're, I mean, some of them, as I recall, and this is, sometimes when you're blinded by pure hatred, like I am, things get a little bit foggy. What I don't forget was this, though. It was an odd makeup. I go over, and there were a couple of the guys sitting on the steps that just looked like probably rather not take them anyway.
Right.
Like they looked visibly shaken, but not like, no, man, I'm good.
Yeah.
They looked like they would be of no use. And I don't mean that in a bad way or facetiously. They just looked shaken to the point that we need to leave them here. The team leader still seemed like a dick, right? And I was like, hey, we're going to roll back in. Who's coming? Yeah. This guy kind of doesn't step up to me, almost aloof. Like, that's what kind of made me even more pissed, was almost dismissive. And he speaks for everybody. He goes, we're not going. And I said something, in hindsight, I wish I would have said it with more intent. Yeah. But I think it came out very matter of fact, right? And I was like, all right, well, if I don't see you there, I don't want to see you again. And I turned around and it sounded in my mind like, I was like, and if I don't see you, but it probably was more glib,
right.
All right, well, I don't want to see you again, So off we go. The next thing I know, and again, it's not like, I'm not trying to, like, we weren't like the Keystone Cops. Everybody was, from Nason to Kurt. Kurt's ready. He drove down, so he's making sure the vehicle's ready to go. Steve's making sure his vehicle's ready to go. Nason's like working the GPS, like, hey, the hospital in Gaza City, what are the coordinates? Let's bring it up. Like, we're going to make this quick, alternate routes. I don't think he knew, Nason, I don't think he knew that I went over and asked. Yeah. Because the next thing I know, I speak to Joe. We come up with, all right, this is what we're going to do. I turn around, Nason comes back over, and he goes, these fucking guys aren't going with us. And I mean, I didn't think it was funny at the time, but looking back, I guess it was kind of funny, because Nason was just, still to this day, man, he's a good guy, but I guess he didn't realize I had already asked, and I didn't tell him. He goes over, and he's like, hey, like, grab your shit. We're getting ready to roll. Right. And they said no again. Hey, these fucking guys aren't going with us. I'm just like, then in the midst of all of this, like, we're just about to roll. And the next thing you know, my phone rings. And I'm like, okay, again, like, is this the embassy? I don't recognize the number. I answer the phone, and it's Jim. Now, Jim's in Iraq. So I'm like, hello, this is Rocky. And he's like, Rocky, it's Jim. Dude, I tell you what, at that point, I felt like I held it together. Didn't shed a tear, was completely and totally focused. As soon as I heard him on the phone, I was like, and he's like, what's going on? And I was like, they're gone, brother. And I was like, Bravo team's been hit. And I said, we're at the Erez Crossing right now. And he was like, roger that. Now, what was kind of wild was we had already had the brief with the general, everything ready but the green light, like, go, right? And I was like, so I said, Vic took off in the helicopter with Oscar. I said, we're still looking for the other three. I said, I think they're at the hospital, waiting for word, right? So roger that. And which again, it wasn't really small talk or anything, but what was wild was now I'm getting the wave like, hey, come here. I go, Jim, we're about ready to move, I think. I got to go. And I remember this like it was yesterday, and I'll remember it till the day I die. He goes, all right, listen. And like it was like everything stops. Like, listen. And I was like, yeah. He goes, you know what you have to do. He goes, take a deep breath and do it. And I was like, roger that. I got this. And he's like, I know you do. And later he would tell me, he was like, I had both of your numbers in my phone. And I knew that the teams had been split up. And he's like, and when word went out, that a team had been hit in the Gaza Strip, he's like, brother, he's like, I had two numbers in my phone. He goes, I knew one of you would answer and one of you wouldn't. And I was like, yeah, that's accurate. So while this is going on, and this happened a lot faster than the retelling of it, right? It's kind of boom, boom, boom. But in the meanwhile, I'm thinking, here we go, we're rolling to the hospital. Next thing you know, the wave I'm getting, the call I'm getting, they're like, stand down. The other three, and this really, and kind of dovetails into the part that Eric told me this last October that I did not know. While we were still waiting, are we going to the hospital? Let's get the bodies, right? Like we're ready to roll. Eric is on the phone with the Palestinian Authority from the embassy. Okay, he's at the embassy, he's calling Gaza. And they're giving him this kabuki jug fuck of, we don't know where they are. Well, we heard an ambulance, but you heard an ambulance picked them up. You're in charge. Yeah. Find them, right? So Eric says to them, he goes, listen, motherfucker. He was like, you know what drone strikes are, right? He's like, I'm telling you right now, if anything happens to one of those bodies, I will call in a fucking drone strike on your headquarters within the minute. Right. And then meanwhile, he's telling us that, and he goes, he didn't know I didn't have access to that. Like, he had no way of knowing that that's not going to happen. And he's like, and here I am threatening him with a drone strike. I was like, that's cool, man. Right on. Like, I wish I'd have known that. I would have probably had a little bit more swagger, on the ground at the time, See this? I got Eric on speed dial, But, yeah, he threatened them with a drone strike. But I guess what ended up happening is, so, I'm getting motion, like, hey, come here. Okay, great. He's like, they're on their way here. I'm like, what's happened? So the hospital, I guess, between the threat of the drone strike and more the reality of the I hate the word optics, but the threat of the drone strike, and hey, if that crowd does come to the hospital, they're not going to be indiscriminate. Right. They're probably going to trash the hospital in an attempt to get to the guys, right. And then that's going to be all over the news, and right. Then whatever blow for fucking liberty these guys think they struck by killing three Americans is kind of going to go out the window if it's followed up with some like Somali like savagery, right. So we're like, okay, they're coming back, and I have to tell you, like in that instant, I was kind of, like almost a mini like adrenaline dump, like you're right. go, then stop. Right. But in the meanwhile, and this is just tactically very, very sound. There is no way the IDF was going to let one, let alone three Palestinian ambulances cross over unchecked. Right. So they're like, okay, here's what we're going to do. They're going to bring the... Remember, I think I told you there was like maybe a couple 100 meters of no man's land between like where you would cross the Israeli point and then like desolate. Yep. And then there was like a gate arm with a couple Palestinian soldiers, So what they would do was one at a time, they would send an ambulance halfway. They needed somebody who knew the team to visually identify the bodies, right. Acknowledge, and then send them up one at a time. I was like, well, I'll do it, So I kind of just double time it down into the middle of nowhere, right? And I'm standing there like an idiot. Here comes one ambulance. They open the door. I look, and I'm like, yeah, that's Johnny Lind. So, okay, roger that. And if if I'm not mistaken, I went down on foot because I didn't know any better. Right. Well, no shit. Right behind me comes an Israeli ambulance. Okay. So now the plan's making more sense, right? Because here I am, like I'm thinking I'm going to identify it and give them a thumbs up. No, they kind of cross-loaded, Palestinian ambulance here, Israeli ambulance pulls up beside it. Corpsman from the IDF gets out. I identify the first body. I'm like, yeah, that's John Lind. And like, okay, so I could spell that for me. Yeah, sure. So he fills out, his paperwork, little clipboard packet. They cross-load the stretcher from one to the next, and boom, off they go. I still wait. Both ambulances, they kind of turn, Palestinian goes back that way, Israeli goes that way. I'm standing there. Next one comes up. Next IDF ambulance comes down. Next one is Mark. Right? I positively identify him. Third one's John Branchizio. All good, right? So now the last of the ambulances returns. I double time it back up to the border. I'm thinking, well, let's grab our shit and let's head back to the embassy, because now no next of kin had been notified. There's a lot that we have to do, okay? But in the meanwhile, the powers that be decide that they want to investigate the attack site, right? So the DRSO, who was in the third seat, he's on the phone with the embassy now. And he says to me, he's like, look, I know you guys have had a very rough day. And he was like, but we're considering this a crime scene, and I have to go take pictures for investigation. And at that moment, it was kind of in my head, it was like surreal, and I remember I said to him, I was like, sir, listen, I said, you're the investigator, not me, right? And I said, but you do understand that that crime scene's already been overrun. I mean, 400 or 500 civilians have already partied through the wreckage. And I said, so I would think any evidence you could get would be contaminated by now. And he was like, well, I still have to try. And I was like, no, roger that. And I wish I could say this with more nobility of purpose, but there wasn't. My whole thing was, all right, Americans just got killed. You're going to go in there. Highly likely there's going to be violence. I'm going to kill every motherfucker that I can. That's how my afternoon is going to go. And that's what was on my mind. I wish I could say, for the cause or for the, for discovery of truth or something. There wasn't any of that. It truly was not one of my better, moments. But again, skeleton crew. It was Steve, Nason, myself, same loadout that we described.
Right.
And to their credit, as advertised, the IDF vehicle stayed, a couple hundred meters behind us. But you want to talk about, totally outgunned. I mean, this is a marked IDF vehicle with 2 soldiers in it, and Vaughn, simply to communicate and relay our need for help. Right. I'm like, man, this is, in hindsight, probably one of the dumbest things we ever did, tactically speaking. And the only thing that was, the most important thing with the limited assets we had, and I just kept repeating this. I was like, all right, Steve, you're driving one vehicle. I said, Kurt, you've got the other one. I said, guys, once we get in, and we were told that the Palestinian Authority has the scene secured. Well, fuck those guys. That's going to probably be the first few people I shoot, So, but they had a perimeter around the wreckage, keeping the crowd at bay. And I said, all right, when we get down there, drive into the perimeter. And I said, before anybody cracks a seal, gets out of the vehicle, drive into the perimeter, turn the vehicles around, facing out, and remember to leave side by side, but leave enough distance that both interior doors can open. Because we got to move fast. I can't get in, and it becomes a clown show. So we roll in, and just crazy. There are familiar faces that stand out. Simply because, like the old, you're probably too young to even remember Sesame Street. One of these things is not like the others, right? So news crews, we would run into news crews all the time. And there was a news crew from Norway. I remember because they were both like 7 feet tall, blonde hair, fair, the reporter was a female, the cameraman was a male, and both looked like any of the CrossFit Games athletes from Iceland, and in that crowd, and again, appropriately dressed, the female was across the board, they would always wear headscarves out of respect, but your headscarf or not, you still see, bright blonde hair, and I remember that in this sea of olive skin, dark hair, as soon as we get out of the vehicle, the first thing I see is that reporter, and I'm like, this just happened. Yeah. This just happened. Were they covering another story or what? Well, come to find out, Hamas put out the word to all the news services that something big is happening in Gaza this morning. You think anybody had the courtesy to give us a heads up? But I understand that that's all part of like, what is it? Responsible journalism or some bullshit like that, right? Oh, we can't share that. Well, fuck you. You know, next time you get your ass kidnapped, don't call us.
Right.
Yeah, I make shit up. We'd go anyway. But, you know, it was odd. It was very, very odd. But so we get out, and we didn't get out with an aggressive posture, but we got out like fully armed. Right. You know, like I think I mentioned to you before, it was almost laughable. And I'm not poking fun at the SOPs. You know, the SOPs for diplomatic security are a bit different. We're not hostile towards Palestine at that time. You know, or any time. I mean, they've never been an enemy of you know what I'm saying, like an official enemy state. So we would have a pistol covered, you know, concealed, and the rifles and body armor would always stay in the truck, you know, in the gun bag in the truck. Well, not this time. I mean, we were kitted up and expecting the worst. So we get out, and now, as I recall, well, first and foremost, the drivers never get out of the vehicle, ever. So the limited assets that we had, and rightfully so, because if the driver gets out and if the driver goes down, now who's driving? What's happening? So Kurt and Steve stayed in their respective vehicles. We hit the ground. It's Nason, myself, and the DRSO, and that was it. And we're moving around, and the DRSO's got his digital camera, and he's clicking. And I mean, I do understand in hindsight, there was a fucking crater like you wouldn't believe where the device went off. The remains or parts of the Suburban were, you know, there was like a piece of it that was still together, but the rest of it was scattered all over, you know. And he's taking pictures, and there you could see like there was just everything had been overrun. Well, then what starts to happen is the crowd starts to throw rocks. Never saw anything like it in my life, right? The volume, the volley, and the damage that they did. I mean, you know, think about this. The vehicles are armored, so you're not going to hurt anybody inside. But, you know, a rock thrown at an appropriate enough distance, these things are hitting the metal skin of the vehicles.
Right.
And, like, not just denting, but, like, you know, putting holes in the metal, right?
Yep.
And as I recall, and this was just divine intervention, man, nobody got hurt. Everybody but me got hit. Yeah. And not for any reason. Wasn't like I was some kind of super ninja. Yeah. It was, you know, the hand of God, you know, just wasn't there. Nobody got hit bad. You know, a couple guys, you know, I think, I'm not sure who, if it was Nason or the DRSO, got like a little glancing blow off the head, you know, with a rock, nothing to put him down. But that's the essence of it, right? It's not a matter of throwing rocks for harassment. It's throwing rocks to bring you down. You get hit, you go to the ground, then you get overrun. And that's how it works, right? So after, and what made me think of this? I didn't think. What started to happen was we're surrounded. So the first volley comes from what would have been my right-hand side. And again, to his credit, you know, Nason and I are both orbiting around the DRSO, kind of trying to, like, moving targets are harder to hit, but we're trying to move in such a way that the deputy is always between us, right? So high volume is coming from this direction. In hindsight, it might have looked funny, but it wasn't the intention. High volume's coming from here. So I raise my rifle, and I turn, and I sweep the crowd. As I do that, the entire crowd drops. Yeah. All right, great. Now the volume of rocks picks up from behind me. Yeah. So I turn, and I lift my rifle, and I sweep that side, right? So wherever the heaviest volume was coming from, I just never fired around, but as soon as I'd come guns up, they would drop. Yeah. And the craziest thing, and I remember this like it was yesterday, about my third turn, you know, we're constantly talking. I'm like, Nason, you know, tell him we've got to go. Yeah. Like, this isn't going to last forever, right? On my third, like 1, 2, 3, this time I scan over, the crowd drops, and I see 3 fuckers right in the middle, maybe 50 yards away from me. They don't drop. They're like this. Yeah. And I'm like, that's it. That's it right there. Yeah. Instigators within the crowd, keeping everybody else fired up, because civilians will drop. Right? Well, civilians who have been exposed to that type of potential violence would just get down. These guys were the were the initiators, the instigators, right? And you know what? And I didn't see a weapon. You know, that was the thing. I was kind of like, well, shit, man. I trust myself enough to take that shot.
Right.
But, and at that point, it was just, then like they realized I'm not pulling the trigger, and then it was kind of like they're getting less and less apt to drop. The volume picked up, and I'm like, we have got to go, and that was it. I think even the deputy realized at that time. He was like, let's get out of here, And
there's not much more for him to gain at that point, right?
No, nothing. What was crazy though was, and I don't remember who asked for it. I think the IDF did, because there was a liaison between the IDF and the Palestinian Authority, and they're like, hey, what was in the vehicles besides your teammates? What was in the vehicles? And I was like, well, you got full gear loadouts times 4 operators, right? So you got 4 M4s, 4 Glock 19s. I couldn't tell you, like our minimum loadout, I could tell you that, but nobody carried the minimum. No one carried the minimum.
Right.
So now you're looking at magazines, how many rounds per, how many mags per, tear gas canisters, any personal effects were long gone. I mean, we recovered wallets and identification, but there was no, surprisingly, no one traveled with cash, I guess, But I do remember this, when they brought back the wreckage, and again, the problem I had with state were the clowns that, made that I don't talk to contractors and that little goofy bastard, That's it. That's where my problem begins and ends. The ones that we worked with, the Yvonne, Eric, Mark, the deputy, I couldn't have asked for more. Could not have asked for more. And they were so, I don't know what the word is. They showed such foresight when they sent a flatbed truck to recover the vehicle. They had, those, the military, like camouflage nets that they have. They sent one of those down with it. So when they loaded the wreckage on the flatbed and strapped it down, they would have the netting over it so it wouldn't draw unnecessary attention. You don't want it to be a spectacle. So we get a call, and they said, hey, do you want to come to the embassy here? The vehicle, I don't know where they sent that, but again, I believe they actually sent it back to the States for forensic, investigation. But they had folding tables in one of the conference rooms at the embassy with all the guys, belongings on it. And I do remember that, and this was just, just not using my head. We get there, we start looking through their things. And I'm like, okay, I remember taking Ziploc bags, and I was like, all right, we'll divide these. This is Mark's wallet. I put it in here, and I go, oh, that's a keychain he always carried, and boom. And I'm touching all the stuff, and it's emotional. So you're touching the stuff, and you're starting to cry. And I'm starting to cry, and I'm rubbing my eyes. And all of a sudden, I'm like, oh, sweet fuck. The tear gas canisters had gone off in the explosion. So now there's tear gas residue over everything. And, nobody's gloved up. Like, I'm just picking stuff up and bagging it, and I'm wiping my eyes. And I'm like, so that was a rude little awakening. But, yeah, I will never forget that. It was just the most, it was bizarre, But now, on the drive back, I remember, I'm like, okay, Vic asked me before he took off. And he said, listen, I'm going to give you a phone number. It's my brother in L.A. He was like, as soon as you get a chance, please call him, because this thing is going to take however long it takes, and the news will not release the names until next of kin are notified. So in the meanwhile, my family, his family, every one of our families is like, well, is that my son? Is that my husband? Is that my, So I was like, yeah, no problem. So long story short, we get back. I told Kurt and Nason, I was like, guys, listen, man, get to a phone. Call your families now. Let them know you're okay. First phone I got to, I called Vic's brother. I still hadn't called my wife yet, I didn't know. I think I told that story the last time, where my sister, through dumb luck and a pair of Oakley sunglasses, a friend of hers saw me on television choking a reporter. And you know what? If I saw him again and he did the same thing, I'd fucking choke him again. But, yeah. That's I it's bad enough as it is, but we're trying. And actually, when that whole alleged choking incident occurred, we're trying to get the lone survivor off of an ambulance so that he could be put on a medical helicopter, so that he could be flown, for life-saving, medical care. And these assholes are trying to push us out of the way to get a good shot. I'm like, oh, you'll get one. You'll get one. But anyway, I didn't realize that my parents already knew, and I didn't know that Jennifer didn't know, because again, it's all kind of processing pretty fast. But I will share this part of the story, because this is something that just things that you don't jump rope. There's a training going on the second deck, and got some Thai fighters up there doing some jump rope. It's very rhythmic, kind of cool. You can probably hear that. But it's better than the tire flips. I'll tell you what, when you're sitting down here and the tire flips start, I'm like diving for cover. But at the time, my wife was a membership director at a beautiful health club here in Pittsburgh that is no longer even here, right? It was the health club that I worked at as an undergrad at the University of Pittsburgh. And, of course, when I was an undergrad at the University of Pittsburgh, I think my wife was in junior high. So we didn't know each other. But I worked there as an undergrad. She worked there. We didn't know each other, of course, after I left for the Navy. But she was then, at that time, a membership director at the club. And her office was, right in the main area, like in the, I guess, the lounge area, I guess. They had like a big sofa, cafe, glassed in, racquetball courts, pro shop, membership office, right next to like the sitting area with their flat screen TV and all that. So only after the fact, I get her on the phone, and she's like, "Hey, honey, what's up? How are you?" She had no idea what happened, so she thought this was just a regular call. So now I have to tell her. Well, she's shaken up. And when I was able to talk, I said, "Listen, I don't have a lot of time. I just want you to know I'm okay. I've got a lot to do right now." So, all right. Well, when I talked to her later on, she said, she's like, "This was so strange." And she was like, "But Jimmy," and it was a family-owned, husband and wife-owned racket club, or health club. And I will say this first and last name because I will never forget this. Jim and Linda Rosenblum, Pittsburgh natives, I consider dear friends to this day. All right. And I worked there as an undergrad. Jim was the owner. Like, basically, I worked for him when I was a kid, And when he saw the news, he knew where I was, and he knew the magnitude of it. And again, no names are released. So he came downstairs from his office. He went to the front desk, and he told the girl at the front desk, he said, "Listen, if a call comes in for membership, put it through to Jennifer. If a call comes through and asks for her by name, you call me first." Because he was convinced that if they reached out to her at work, he doesn't want her to get that news by herself. Right. But then, don't believe that it was that he didn't trust the young lady at the desk. He stayed in the lobby all day. He took... Jen was like, it was so weird because they usually had the news on. I guess he took the remote and put on like PBS or like Turner Classics, something that no news would break into, right. So he changed the channel, took the remote, and just hovered around that lobby lounge area all day until she found out. So I always, it's those things that in the grand scheme of things, I of course had no idea, no way of knowing, but it's those things that speak volumes, about the character of the people that we cross paths with, I think, but it's crazy. So we got back, did as much communication, as many calls as had to be, and the next thing two of our people, Roger, from Jerusalem, right. He came down with a dear friend of ours, Maxie Williams, right? One of the best guys I've ever known. And they both came down, and they get a moment with me when we rolled up to the embassy, and Max is a big, scary dude. You know, he comes over, he just grabs me in a bear hug, and he's just, holding on. And at that point, I think what happens is you get so much adrenaline going through you during the course of a day like that, and then it just drains you. And then, when adrenaline dumps, and now like your emotions are just right, and I'm like just a mess, And so we kind of calm down, recover, and all this. And he was like, Rock, he was like, would you give me your pistol? And I'm like, what the fuck would you give me my pistol? I'm like, sure, it's clear. Here you go. He goes, all right. He's like, no, I'm going to tell you this because I want you to know. And then he basically laid out a very quick version of the story. Yep. And I'm like, and now I'm thinking like, what the fuck did you take you think I just run amok and started shooting people in the embassy? I'm like, no, but I thank you, because you're probably, you know what I mean? Like safety first, right? But, and I remember digesting it for a minute, and Roger, and again too, in that moment, I mean, two versions, right? Not of that story, but the version of Roger where, if you don't like it, Chris, there's the door. And really, like, if he didn't tee it up like that, it wouldn't have been as funny when Chris just went, all right, consider this my two, that kind of that dick move kind of had to happen in order for that response to be so classic, right? But, in this moment, he was like, I don't know if he was trying to be fatherly or trying to be helpful or whatever, but he's like, man, you know what, Rocky? He's like, it's enough to know that they're going to have to live with this. And again, like he's trying to, I'm like, dude, check. Yeah. Like right now, I don't give a fuck because here's the thing. I still have my pressing matter and my pressing task at that moment. Mark had a girlfriend, a beautiful, wonderful Israeli girl. And born in Israel, grew up in Boston. Family moved back to Israel. And she was just the sweetest, most wonderful girl. And I'm like, oh, no. Yeah. She's not next of kin. Yeah. So nobody's going to tell her. It's going to make the news. And I'm like, well, that's not going to happen. Right. That is not going to happen. So, and then I'm like, now you start to scramble. Because I'm like, well, wait a second. Like, I don't have her phone number. Why would I have my best friend's girlfriend's phone number? Right. That's how guys don't become best friends anymore. Exactly. You know what I mean? You know me well enough to know that I have stupid. Do you remember? It was a mobile phone carrier. Might have been Verizon, T-Mobile, or whatever. Years ago, it was like you could have 5 people on your plan.
Oh yeah, the fabulous 5. Yeah, T-Mobile. Mm-hmm.
And 2 guys are sitting there talking, and all of a sudden it's like. The Mariah Carey Secret Lover ringtone. Secret. He's like, why is my girlfriend in your phone?
Exactly.
But yeah, I'm like, so I'm like, okay, wait a minute. When an American citizen starts to date a local working in a foreign embassy, you've got to fill out forms, like letting the embassy know that you're in close contact with a foreign national. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, if need be, I'll get her contact information from that. And I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, he filled that out a while ago, and I know she just moved. She had just recently moved. So is there a phone number on the form? I never did one of those. I don't know, And then all of a sudden it hits me. I'm like, about a week or so prior, I get a call from an unknown number, like a number I don't recognize. I answer it. It's Mark. And I go, hey, man. I go, what, like, I had his phone number saved. It should have come up. Yeah. He goes, my battery died. He's like, this is a TARS phone. I'm like, great. Well, I didn't save it under her name, but it was still in the call log. Right. So I just went, scrolled, and I didn't get numbers from people I didn't know. So like scroll, there it is, right? So I do remember Max was still with me, and so I call her up, and God bless him, man. He was like, Rock. He's like, how about I stay here with you tonight? And in that moment, I'm not really thinking, but I'm like, man, I lived in the same house. When we reconfigured the teams, we didn't move houses. Right. So I was still in the house I was in when I was Bravo, but now I'm Alpha Team living with the other 3 Bravo guys, right? So it never occurred to me. Like, he's like, man, Maxie, he's like, man, why don't I just stay with you? Why don't I just stay here tonight? And I was like, no, brother. I said, listen, you got a big day tomorrow. Like, we got to be back here to prepare everything for the service at Plainside. Their bodies are going to be flown back home, and then we're going to follow one each, to escort them to their homes. And I said, did you bring a change of clothes? He's like, no, I didn't bring anything. And I'm like, well, you're sure as shit not going to fit in any of my stuff, So I said, but if you don't mind, I said, would you go with me, to give the news to Attar? And he said, sure. So he drives me over, and I called her first because I remembered her new apartment because Mark and I had helped her move some stuff over, but I don't remember the unit.
Right.
So we pull up, I call her from the street, and she was like, Rocky? And I'm like, hey, sweetie. I said, are you home? And she said, I am. She's like, where is he? And I was like, can I come up? And she was like, sure. And I'm like, honey, I don't remember what number it is. So she tells me, and we get up. And I remember standing in her kitchen, and she's on one side of the room, I'm on the other, and Maxie's right over here. And she's just looking at me, and she was like, where is he? And Frayne, honest to God, like, I couldn't say it. I couldn't form the words. And I remember just standing there staring at her, and in my mind I'm thinking, all right, any second now Max is going to tell her, or my silence is going to cause her to figure it out herself. And I swear to God, like, the instant hung like days, and nobody said anything. And finally, I knew, like, I've got to do it. And all I could think to say, I was like, honey, he's gone. And then, of course, she reacted the way you would expect. And I remember thinking, and I think it was Max that suggested it. He was like, listen, we don't want to leave you here, And she was like, well, we, called her parents, right? So she called her parents. We stayed with her until they drove over and picked her up to take her back to their house, And then Cheese had a fiance who lived further north. And she got word, of course, and then she was coming in to his apartment. And I was like, okay, well, I'll meet her there. Because then she called my number, and Elizabeth was her name, is her name. And I was like, hey, I'll meet you at John's, And she was like, well, a friend of ours is going to meet there too, so she'll probably be there when you arrive. I said, okay. Well, it turns out their friend was a British bartender at another place that we used to go to quite often. And Emma is her name. She was just a wonderful, wonderful girl. And we used to joke around. There was a show, a British TV show called The Avengers. Not the superhero Avengers. They were more like spies or whatever. But there was a female in the Avengers called Emma Peel. And I was like, hey, I'm Rocky. And she's like, I'm Emma. And she goes, oh, Emma Peel and Rocky Balboa. And I was like, it sounds better with a British accent, But what was wild was, like, she was just one of the regulars. We were regular customers, and she was a very nice. Oh, young Andrew just showed up. It is time almost for us to sign off. But yeah, man, that part of it was far worse than anything I think we faced all day. I was able to spend a lot of time, with Attar until her parents came, and then I spent quite some time with Elizabeth. And then over the next few days, we had the Plainside memorial service at Ben Gurion. They flew the boys into Dover, Delaware, for processing. And then that's where 3 of us flew, but we were able to bring Attar and Elizabeth with us because they, each of them flew to the home of record for the memorial service. And it's just wild because, and strangely enough, Mark was from New Jersey. So from Delaware, Alan flew to Missouri with Johnny Lind. Vic flew to San Antonio with John. And then for me, I remember the conundrum, the planning is like the mortuary is like, well, I mean, from where we are in Delaware to drive to the nearest airport to fly to New Jersey, we're better off driving. So we're like, right on, man. So instead of a hearse, which I thought was more appropriate, they loaded Mark into a van, more just a plain panel van, like a hearse inside, but a van on the outside. And I had a rental car, and driving up to New Jersey, from Delaware to New Jersey in mid-October. And I remember being on the interstate and I pass a line, welcome to New Jersey, and fucking Bruce Springsteen comes on the radio. And I'm just like, man, this is the most fucked up drive I've ever taken in my life, But, yeah, man, I mean, so I think the craziest part about it is looking 20 years ago at that experience and seeing what's happened and how Hamas has grown in power over 20 years, and they're everything that they tried to be. They're everything that they, intended to be when they were pretending to be this benevolent group, And yeah, I think for the next episode we'll fill in some gaps because there were some things that happened on the ground. Again, just telltale signs, that led up to it. But, the follow-on is Oscar, the only survivor from that ambush. He and I deployed together to Iraq the following July. Yeah. So this guy had a broken leg, broken back, was just pretty bad. Recovered full mobility, and was able to deploy again the following July. So crazy. And the next episode, when I tell about the time he and I were ambushed together, I will never forget. My dad was like, wait a second. He's like, that's the same guy that got blown up in Israel. I was like, yeah, Dad, it is. Only this time I was right beside him. He goes, son, he's either the luckiest or unluckiest man I've ever heard of. He's like, so I don't know to tell you to stay close or far away. Just not sure, But, all right, man. Well, thank you for that.
Yeah, no, I think that was definitely another heavy discussion there.
Yeah, it was wild. It was wild. So, all right. Thank you all for tuning in. And if this was a little bit more than you expected, cowboy the fuck up. All right, we're out. Wait, I want to see the little thumb icon. See, that would have cheered me up today, and it's not happening now. All right, we're out.